G'day guys, Mac with the Outer Circle. I am still crook. Chest infection, classic chest infection, lots of antibiotics. It has obviously put quite the damper on trying to record when you're non-stop coughing. But I'm just about through it, so I am putting up a video to cover off on basically all of the things that have happened in the last 2 weeks. So, when we last spoke about the Heresy, I was just pointing out the fact that, look, the track record of the game system and the way it's been treated/mistreated over the last edition or so has left a bitter taste in the mouths of many. Not everyone, but many people. And you're seeing a concerted outcry from segments of the community when you look on forums or, social media. Basically, it's very split at the moment. There are 3 camps. One camp is positive, one camp is negative, and the majority camp is in the middle going, not sure, let's wait and see. And I think that's pretty fair. I'm in the let's wait and see leaning negative category. Not fully negative, believe me, in the conversations I've had in private with friends, there are people who are a lot more critical than I am currently. I do understand, as do most people, that these are previews of the rules that we're getting. And previews, obviously, previews are not perfect, right? They lack context, things like that. And so, with that in mind, we're going to look at some of the things they've released so far. But before I read through any of that, I want to double down on a point that I made in the preceding video, which is that I'm not here to insult people or to change your minds or anything like that. I want you to, if you're going to have fun, right? I don't want to take that away from you. That is not my place. That is not a superpower that I want. Okay, if I'm going to have a superpower, it's to make lots of money with no effort and bang 1990s Jennifer Connelly. Let's be honest here. But I think that's a pretty good superpower. I think if you are overly positive about the direction the game is heading in, you are... What's the nicest way I can phrase this? A little naive, I think. Because harder words come to mind than naive, but naive is the one I'm going to choose. Because this game company has a track record of shitting the bed when it comes to rules. That's why they have to update them every couple of years, because they crank them out and they stuff them up. It's just the way things go. So net positivity at this point is sort of a bizarre thing to me, because I'm looking at it and going, well, you can be positive that they're releasing more plastics, but they already were releasing a ton of plastics, which is great, don't get me wrong, but that is not the selling point, okay? The selling point for 2.0 was Plastic Heresy. 3.0 has to offer something different. And I think it's rules. It has to offer really, really good rules. And from the track record of Games Workshop, we do not get really, really good rules. So, before I even, get into the episode proper, let's go back to this article here, the 4-minute article from 23rd of May 25. And I just want to take you down and just read out a couple of sentences here. So, how different are the new rules? The Horus Heresy Age of Darkness game system has been going since 2012, with the first full rulebook was released in 2017. There have been several changes and updates over the years, and this new release marks the dawn of the 3rd edition. The Warhammer Design Studio have been pretty happy with where the game has been for the last few years, and they have seen this new edition as the opportunity to reinvestigate the core... I was going to say reinvigorate, but it's reinvestigate the core systems and make improvements, rather than making wholesale changes. This is very much the same Horus Heresy game you know and love, and the team have made targeted refinements to a system that already works really well, making changes only where necessary and adding flavour wherever they can. There are several cool new things for players to get their teeth into, including challenge, gambits, tactical status and army selection, all of which we'll go into in more detail in upcoming articles. So, that is very much the touched up corporate speak. Let's get real for a moment, okay? You're here in the outer circle watching this video because let's read through the bullshit together, right? Bullshit is different to a lie. Let's just talk about that first. bullshit is like knowingly being deceptive in order to hype something up, basically. A lie is just saying an untruth. This is an untruth with a purpose behind it. And when they say that they've been happy with the new edition, okay, the design studio has been. The community has been very vocal about not being happy with it. Large wholesale changes have been made through things like Panoptica, through Mournival, and obviously I've made a lot of videos on it. I've had, I'd say, general agreement with my critiques of the system. I know that the immediate group of people I play with in my state / in the larger country as a whole, we definitely here in Australia have major issues with the core game system. There has been a very lukewarm reaction and reception to all of the expansions and books that have come out. So I do not think the community has been happy with the direction that 2.0 took. In fact, I think if you play anything outside of essentially Marines, maybe Custodes to a lesser degree, you probably had very negative perception of the edition, okay? A lot of negative experiences because the way weapon skill charts worked and the way leadership charts worked this edition, it was absolutely punishing if you were playing something that wasn't power armor. Anything weapon skill 3 was never going to be able to fight weapon skill 4 in melee, for example, let alone weapon skill 5. The way brutal worked, attempted dreadnoughts, that kind of thing. These were problems that we knew about from before the game even launched. People who playtested the system in the playtest versions 2 and 3 that I spoke with, which I received a copy of in advance, leaked to me, they mentioned how they fed back a lot of this to Games Workshop and were basically told, we don't care, we've already decided that's how it's going to be, which defeats the purpose of having the playtest in the first case. But, you know, interesting to see that that's the route that Games Workshop took. So they've done all that, and then they want to turn around and say that they're reinvestigating the core systems and making improvements rather than making wholesale changes. Well, first thing, if you're happy with where it is, why you need to make improvements to the core systems, right? The only core system that really needed a rework was reactions. The rest of the core systems, like shooting phase, movement phase, they were pretty good. It was things that they had touched from last edition, like the unit types. Yeah, I'd say unit types is probably one of the worst offenders. Obviously, adding reactions, that was another bad offender. What else was a bit so-so? Our missions were very so-so. So, those things that they touched from the previous edition, they were craptacular, okay? So, yeah, they could fix those, but it doesn't seem like they are fixing those. They're going on to fix something else. And then they say, rather than making wholesale changes. But here's my question then, and I know many of you are thinking it. If changing all the weapons values, if changing how army selection works, if changing reactions to also exist, but they're more of a command points activated system, if adding in tactical statuses, if adding in challenge gambits, all this other stuff is not making wholesale changes, then I think the obvious question that everyone is asking is, what would the writers define as making wholesale changes? Because I think to myself and the majority of you listening, that sounds like an awful lot of changes to the core game system. Because you're completely changing how things that have been essentially more or less the same for, 30 years now. We've basically been using the modifications of the 3rd edition 40k rule set, which came out in 1998. So we've basically been using that same edition ever since and just tweaking it and tweaking it and tweaking it. Very, very subtle changes. These are major changes. These are closer in line with 8th edition 40k than they are with 7th edition 40k. So when you read through it and you look at the BS spin, you've got to say, hang on a minute, those things are pretty questionable that they're saying in their articles, because what we are seeing does not match what they're saying. And then they say, this is very much the same Horus Heresy game you know and love, and the team have made targeted refinements to a system that already works really well, making changes only where necessary and adding flavour wherever they can. So, many things to unpack there. First of all, the system did not work really well because of the targeted changes you made in 2.0. You went backwards instead of going forwards when writing the game system because of things like that weapon skill chart. That weapon skill chart and the changes to leadership really screwed over any army that wasn't power armor. Like, majorly screwed them over. You can't even run Castellax effectively anymore. It can't be done. They used to be a mainstay of Mechanicum for literally a decade. So, no. There was no targeted refinements in the past. Why would you be targeting again? Well, if anything, you need to roll it back to Heresy 1.0 and then pick the best parts of 2.0 and go with that. Instead, what we're getting here is, well, more change for the sake of change. And when they say they're making changes only where necessary, it was not necessary to add damage stats on weapons. Now, you can say this last line, the adding flavor wherever they can, is where that comes in. And so adding like weapon stats in, or adding in these additional leadership values and such, that adds flavor. Flavor has its place. I love flavor in games like Necromunda. I love flavor in games like Mordheim. Flavor existed in Rogue Trader, but remember, we don't use the Rogue Trader rule set because it is awful for playing big games. It's very clunky. Games tended to drag on. I have a lot of memories of 2nd edition 40k, and I know how much of a slog that could turn into at times. Those modifiers were deleted at the time because essentially what it was too much bookkeeping, too hard to keep track of, and the armies in 2nd edition were a hell of a lot smaller than the armies that people are playing today. You did not see games of constantly 3,000 point armies and such floating around in 2nd edition. That's not how it worked at all in that time period. So to see them leaning into this route is very concerning to me, because flavor, like, the more simple your game is, as in the less number of units and such you have on the table, the easier it is to lean into flavor. Take Inquisitor 54mm. Awesome for flavor. Tons of stats on them, D100 system. What's going on there with war gear and the way you create war bands and henchmen and all that kind of thing, right? Awesome game system. If you haven't played it, check it out. I actually rate it as one of the more interesting games that Games Workshop dropped over the years. I think it just suffered from when it was released. If it was released into this ecosystem, it would probably be a lot more popular, especially considering they'd be plastic and not white metal that you had to pin together. And anyway, that's a side story. But works really well in that game system. Does not work in big game systems where you've got a ton of stuff to keep track of. And a great example of this would be looking at something like The Lord of the Rings. If you look at the Lord of the Rings game, look at what that's balanced around, numbers-wise. About 30 to 50 models is considered a pretty big game, right? 50 models in a Heresy army, that's nothing if you're playing militia. That's, it would not be unfeasible to have 150, 200 models on the table if you're playing militia. It is very hard, therefore, to have the same level of bookkeeping for that Heresy game as for that Lord of the Rings game, because you're going to need to have an awful lot more stuff happening. When you go and you look at the Lord of the Rings, it doesn't have a bunch of mechanics that 40k does. It doesn't have things like saving, for example. The morale system is very different in that game. You're not testing for morale every turn until your army hits a breaking point, or you're forced to take a courage check because of something that you're fighting, like, say, a ring wraith forces a courage check on you. These things are not very common, but they are constantly going to occur in 30k. And because these things are going to be occurring in 30k relatively semi-often, you have to treat them differently. And so I don't like the excuse from the community as much as from the company of saying, well, who cares that they're making changes? I think that damage effects mean that a whole host of weapons are going to have more viability over, it's going to be awesome against Terminators because it's a multi-damage wound, blah, 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 blah. Think of the bookkeeping, okay? This is already more bloated than a Plague Marine spending a day at the beach in the sun, okay? There is a lot going on here to unpack. So let's go and look at some of these rules now, because I've wobbled on long enough. Bolter, we're seeing that it now has traits. So weapons have traits. That means you're going to have to keep track of all of the trait types. So instead of just having pistol, rapid fire, assault, heavy, as our main weapon types, and of course D weapons. We're going to have one for each type of weapon now. So bolts are bolt weapons. Okay, so all bolt weapons are going to have that trait. Okay, heavy bolter. Oh, it has heavy firepower, I guess, FP. And it's also got the bolt trait. So I've got special rules to manage, and I've got traits to manage. And of course, I've now got the amount of firepower that it has, how many shots it has, the range strength of the weapon, RS, and D for the damage type. So you've made the same chart, you've just made it equally convoluted now. You've turned it more into a unit stat line rather than a weapon stat line that we were used to. Okay, whatever, I can learn to live with that. But why am I having to look at special rules and traits for heavy bolter? A weapon that was very nonchalant in previous editions, okay, going all the way back to the mid-1990s. It was just, oh yeah, it's heavy bolter, rock up, fire 3 shots, go. You know? And now it's got these special rules where, oh, well, if you sit still, it does this, but if you move, you also get this. Okay, so we've got even more special rules. Okay, great. Then we've got weapons like the las cannon. Okay, so las cannon's damage 1, but it's armor bane. Strength 9, firepower 1, AP 2, damage 1. Okay. Traits, it's a las weapon. Heavy D, armor bane. And then we've got melter weapons. Well, melter 6, so it goes to 6 damage. Like, where did they pluck these numbers from? Where was the balancing done? Because this is my concern with these sort of rules writings. You can't just pluck numbers from the sky. You need to thoroughly playtest your system. Now, if you're moving from a Horus Heresy version 1 to Horus Heresy version 1.5, okay, the 6th edition going into 7th edition / going into the Red Book 2017 edition, when you're doing that sort of tweak, it's very easy to modify a few weapons up and down because essentially you've kept everything the same and you're just going, that didn't quite work right, let's tweak this, you know, let's bring down the points on this unit, let's give this unit a buff of some kind. That's very easy to do. But here, you've turned a melter gun from a weapon that does 1 damage into a weapon that now can do 6 points of damage against things like dreadnoughts and tanks. Is that in addition to the fact that, like, is there still a vehicle damage chart? Are you still going to be able to pop them in one shot? If so, this is giving you 6 attempts, or is it just doing that many hull points to the vehicle? We don't know yet, because they haven't given us enough information to base our decision-making process off. But it seems very arbitrary to me, because it's just fallen out of the sky that it does this much damage. Okay? And we're going to be seeing a lot of this sort of thing, where it's like, what was the decision-making process behind this? At what point did they look at the weapons chart in 2.0 or 1.0 and say, this is botched, this doesn't work, we need to completely change the entire thing? But thankfully, we're not making wholesale changes. Right? So, I've got my gripes here. Same thing, disintegrator weapons. So we've got overload special rule. I'm imagining we'll see something similar to that for plasma weapons. Disintegrator weapons trait. So again, traits. We're now having to look at traits for all these things. I'm going to need a chart that I have to play games with that has all of the special rules for all these weapons written down, and then all the traits for all these weapons written down, in addition to having the stat lines for each of these weapons. In previous editions of the game, like 2.0, it was pretty rare to have special rule. It was mostly things like Shred on Lightning Cores, Brutal on Thunder Hammers, and then Rending / Breaching. That's pretty much it. Maybe Concussive as well. So 5 different rules that you would see typically on all of your melee weapons combined. And even then, we all felt that it was a bit, really, do we have to, sort of thing. But, we stuck with it. Now we're getting it on every single range, and so every single range weapon has its trait. Every single range weapon has its special rules of some kind, or none in the case of bolt guns, I guess, so yay for the win. But it just seems very, the account nomancers have been out here, bookkeeping, right? And then we've also got modifiers in addition to that, so initiative modifiers, attack modifiers, strength modifiers on these weapons. So we're keeping track of traits, we're keeping track of special rules, we're keeping track of new profiles, which have different varying amounts of damage per weapon, so multiple damage types per shot. So you're not just keeping track of the number of shots, but you're keeping track of the number of damage per shot, and you're now adding in initiative modifiers, attack modifiers, and strength modifiers on top. That is not streamlined and simplified. And I'm concerned that this will not translate over very well to a high points game system. I think at your skirmish level, your intro boxes, you're playing 500 to 1,000 points aside, I think it'll flow smoothly enough because you won't have that many varieties of weapons on the tabletop at that many points, but also you're having to keep track of a lot less weapons in general. Once you blow up to 3,000 plus, if we go into the large 7,000 point Heresy games that occur, I play enough of them. I usually play a couple of those per year at minimum, and that's just at my place, let alone going to events. I think it's going to become a bookkeeping nightmare. So I'm belaboring the point with you now when I say these things to you, because I really want it to be clear where I'm standing and why I feel that positivity is not a great idea. I'm very much in the I want to try it and see camp, but I've also been playing these games for 30 years. And I think that after a certain point, everyone can agree that you sort of develop a taste where you can look at something on paper and go, that's questionable, because you've got enough experience, like any job, right? If you are a carpenter for 30 years, and you're working with timber every day, you learn the ins and outs of how timber functions. You know what you can and can't get away with when you're working with it. Same sort of thing here with the game system. You know the ins and outs of how Warhammer plays out, and you're like, hang on a minute, I know that is going to cause issues. And that's where I feel I'm at, okay? So weapons profiles, I'm not particularly thrilled. Then we've got this challenge system that they've dropped. So now there's a challenge sub-phase. There's an additional phase as well as the assault phase where you're going to do all your challenges. So it's not just a thing that's happening in Concurrence 2. It's now been separated out as you do it in its own step. And there's going to be a champion and command subtype. So I'm guessing that's going to replace the Chosen Warriors subtype. And there's heroic interventions, which existed already, but no one ever did them. Hardly. And you can choose a gambit in your challenges for your champion. So you've now added this gambit system in addition to just fighting the challenge. So again, bookkeeping. You've just added more crap into the game. And then you got to make a focus roll for your gambit. Oh, God. Did anyone see the problem here? Chartable sabers. Let's see. Breaching 6+, Duelist Edge 1, Initiative Modifier +1, attacks, whatever you've got, strength, whatever strength you are, damage 1. Cool. The A and S make it more confusing than less confusing. Because in the past, it would just be like, +1 initiative, AP nil, damage wouldn't be a thing. So just be, AP. That's it. And special rules on the weapon. Like, cool. So easy. So easy. Yeah, I'm not thrilled by any of this. All right. Tactical statuses. So tactical statuses are status effects, so tokens that you're going to have to place on units to say whether they're pinned, suppressed, stunned, or routed. Okay? So they're gameplay statuses that did exist previously, but now they're being tokenized. And if they're tokenizing them, I would say they're going to be a lot more prevalent in this edition. That's why they felt the need to put tokens on there in the first place, and why they're chucking them in the starting box. And yeah, I'm like very so-so on that. It's like, whatever. The statuses existed already. Not a big deal. And then advanced characteristics. So CL, WP, IN, and of course the old LD, leadership. So they're adding on all these additional statuses. And a funny thing was when they first released this article, they stuffed up the rules on the Centurion. Which goes to show that, again, for those who have their faith in the company, an article which has been written probably a month ago that already had the artwork drawn up for it, no one noticed until the article hit the internet and the fans did that they had put Initiative 1 for the Centurion. They might even still have a note down the bottom. Let's see if they do. Yeah, they do. So, yeah, this company, people are trusting to write a really good, clean set of rules that's going to be the best edition of Horus Heresy ever, and they couldn't even get their rules right in their own preview. Yeah, speaks of just the corporate will just nail it. This is definitely the people who want in charge of writing a game system. So I'm obviously being facetious. I think that everything I'm seeing so far for 3.0 is disheartening. I have not looked at any of the systems yet and gone, that is a clear improvement. Instead, every system I'm looking at is like, you took what existed already and you've added more to it. Narratively, that's fine to do. But from an actual functioning game on the tabletop, I have my concerns. I doubt strongly that the people at Nottingham are sitting there putting 3,500 point armies on either side of the table and playing out how these rules work. I highly doubt that. And we know from previous editions that they've just ignored the feedback they've gotten to say when something doesn't work as a mechanic. So I'm sitting here in the camp of, they've probably botched this. In fact, I'm almost certain they have, because these are not targeted fixes at the game system. I think that should be obvious to everyone watching at this point. And again, I'm not saying this to take your hype down. I do not want that. That is not what I'm trying to achieve here. What I'm trying to achieve is a bit of realism, like let's take off the hype glasses for a moment and critically look at what is happening. And what I'm seeing, personally, is a game system which is being meddled with for the sake of meddling in order to sell it as having new mechanics, and using that as justification for a new rule set, rather than doing what was wanted, which is going in and fixing the existing rule set of Horus Heresy 2.0. They could have achieved, by reprinting Heresy 2's rules with amendments, the same sales as Heresy 3. They could have also pleased a lot more people, because it would have meant that there was a lot more carrying over of what existed already into the new edition. Instead, they are basically throwing the baby out with the bathwater, making wholesale changes, lying to our face that they are not making wholesale changes, which I find very disingenuous, because lying is the correct word there. They are lying to our faces. They're saying they're not making wholesale changes. Again, if this is not wholesale changes, what would one define as wholesale changes? Okay? They are doing these things and trying to tell us that it's an improvement for us when it's not what we wanted or requested. I gave the analogy in the previous video. If there is a game and it's a red square, we say we think this game is great, the problem is the colour red, we need that changed to yellow. Apart from that, the game system's perfect. Games Workshop goes, no worries fam, we got your back. Here we go, red triangle. You go, no. I liked red square, I wanted yellow square. Why is it still red, and why are you giving me a triangle? And then they go, no, you like this game system a lot. And you go, okay, fine, I'll test out this game system, but I'm not happy about this. And then the company goes silent. They go radio silent for a year. You don't hear anything. You're like, come on, what's happening with the game system? Why are there no FAQs? No, nothing. Then they turn around and go, guess what? Check it out. It's blue triangle. And you're like, oh, for fuck's sake. All I wanted was yellow square. Why am I now got blue triangle? And why did you say nothing for the last year? Why did you do nothing to try and fix the current game? It's just such a slap in the face to the customer. And they keep doing it. What's that clip from Breaking Bad? He can't keep getting away with this. Like, that's what I feel like right now. So, for those who are wondering where my support will sit for the company in this edition, if you can't tell from the generally negative attitude in this video, I am not intending to buy the models. I am not intending to buy the rules, and I will likely look for yar har har PDFs on day one in order to check out and play test the system. I even go into the local Games Workshop and play test the system in store there and have a read through the rules. But I have invested in everything that they had done in the Horus Heresy. I have all of the black books from Heresy 1 and all of the black books from Heresy 2. That includes the Exemplary Battles in the Age of Darkness Volume 1, March of the Civil War, Beta Garmon, Siege of Chthoniya. I have all those expansions. March of the Civil War, I got it in October of last year. It's already invalidated. There was already issues with that book, as there were with the previous books that have not been FAQ'd. They haven't touched any of these books. And so it's like, well, if you're going to invalidate my collection that exists, and you're going to do it every 3 years because that's what you've decided is best for your shareholders' hype cycle in order to keep the money flowing in, that's cool. is not a part of the game system I want to play into. This also means that it is very up in the air whether I do a getting started for Heresy 3.0 series. Very up in the air. I am leaning more towards I would rather make my own edition of the game and talk about that at this point. Now, if this ends up me not doing YouTube for the Outer Circle anymore, so be it. I can live with that. This is something I've always ever just done for fun. It's not my full-time employment. It's not something I ever wanted to be full-time employment. It never mattered to me what my subscriber count was. That's why I never sit there in the comments say, please like and subscribe and share this with all your friends and blah, blah. Click that bell. I don't do that because it's not that important to me. That's for a different kind of clout chaser. This is just a place for me to sound off and for you to honestly share your views. I don't block your comments. I don't police your comments. I don't tell you what you can and can't say. I treat it as a pretty damn open forum, I think, which I felt was something that lacked in the hobby. So many forums have just been shut down over the years because they weren't pro Games Workshop enough for the community. Community that is overly invested in the well-being of a company rather than their own well-being in the game system they've invested in. And so if this game is a complete dud, well, probably don't expect much out of me. Back with the Outer Circle. See you all next time.